Genetically modified foods were first put on the market in the early 1990s. Typically, genetically modified foods were transgenic plants, products such as soybean, corn, canola, and cottonseed oil. In order to get a general opinion of genetically modified products, we interviewed many shoppers.
Do you know what genetically modified foods are?
Anything pumped with steroids.
Okay, the genetically modified foods are those foods who are being altered, not following the natural way of either growing or harvesting.
Sort of. You don't read very much about a really complete explanation about them, but they do something in order to make them stronger, get more product out of it, make it less resistant to pests, is all I've heard about it.
I try not to buy them.
Do you pay attention to whether the food you buy is genetically modified?
I'm not terribly concerned.
Not so much as the antibiotic stuff. As far as animals, I don't think I've seen that in the package.
Do you ever see labels in supermarkets that would tell you that they are GMO or non-GMO?
I haven't really looked for it, but no, I haven't really come across anything like that.
This is what it might look like if everything was labeled genetically modified. Do you check the ingredients on the labels?
Do pay attention to the foods and the labeling.
But if you just kind of know what you're looking for, then you usually read it pretty easily.
What do you think about genetically modified food?
We just don't know long-term things, and the world made it one way, and now we're changing it, which, when you're talking about a growing organism, I suppose we don't even know what that could be.
GM crops can be produced to be pest resistant. They are given the genetic ability to produce Bt, a toxin found in soil bacterium that repels certain insects. They can also be produced to be herbicide resistant. This means farmers can spray to kill weeds without affecting crops. GM varieties of pest-protected and herbicide-tolerant crops have resulted in reductions in chemical use, boosted yields, and saved growers tens of millions of dollars. The future for GM crops is full of potential. Cold-tolerant and drought-resistant crops could ensure seasonal harvests. Additional vitamins and minerals could boost nutritional values. GM crops could improve economic, health, and social benefits for populations dependent on agriculture in developing countries.
One concern with the production of GM crops is the risk of allergic reactions associated with the transfer of genes. If a protein from one food is incorporated into another, dangerous reactions could result in people with allergies. Another concern with the use of GM crops is the possible transfer of antibiotic resistance. GM crops are created using marker genes for resistance to certain antibiotics in the development of the crop. These genes could confer antibiotic resistance to humans, and the consumption of GM foods could change the makeup of human digestive systems and increase the risk of infections which are resistant to antibiotics.
Through gene flow or gene escape, genes from GM crops can pass on to other members of the same species or other species. The favorable genetic alterations are selected for future generations, and the GMO varietals eventually come to make up a greater proportion of the total population of the given species. The increased use of GM crops could also hasten the evolution of pests resistant to these defenses conferred by the implanted genes. The result would be a continually increasing proportion of the species population showing lessened susceptibility in this case to the beneficial protection of genetic modifications. Also, herbicide-resistant genes could transfer from the crops to the weeds, creating herbicide-resistant superweeds. To prevent such resistance, the EPA requires farmers to plant 20% of their fields with non-GM crop to serve as a refuge for insects.
Biotechnology research is predominantly carried out by the private sector, and there are concerns about market dominance by a few powerful companies. Many new plant genetic technologies and genetically modified plants have been patented, and patent infringement is a big concern in agribusiness. Consumer advocates are concerned that patenting these new seed varieties could raise the prices of seeds so high that small farmers in third world countries would not be able to afford seeds for GM crops.
To purchase GM seeds, a customer must sign an agreement that limits what can be done with them. These agreements are deemed necessary to protect the company's intellectual property and prevent the duplication of genetic advancements that make the seed unique. However, agritech companies take it a step further, including in the agreement that it is forbidden to use seeds for any independent research. Under the threat of litigation, scientists cannot test a seed to explore different conditions under which it thrives, compare seeds from various companies, and cannot examine unintended environmental side effects of genetically modified plants.
One way to combat the possible patent infringement is to introduce a terminator or suicide gene into GM plants. These plants would be viable for only one growing season and produce sterile seeds that do not germinate. Farmers would have to buy a new batch of GM seeds every year, which would be disastrous to growers in third world countries who cannot afford an annual seed payment and traditionally set aside a portion of their crop in seeds for planting next year. There are long-term implications of the use of GMOs. The world's 6.8 billion people use land equal to the size of South America to grow food and raise livestock.
Demographers anticipate the world's population to grow to 9.5 billion by 2050, requiring additional arable land equal in size to the country of Brazil if agricultural practices were to remain as they are. This much additional land does not exist, indicating that agricultural practices have to change unless we want to risk facing a major shortage of food and the economic implications thereof. Increasing food prices could force poor consumers out of the market and lead to armed conflict over arable land and the destruction of forests and other protected lands that are necessary for our survival on the planet as well.
If GMOs aren't so bad, then why don't most consumers know what they're eating? According to the FDA, GM foods are not inherently dangerous and are substantially equivalent to conventionally grown foods. The FDA does not consider the method of production to be meaningful information to be put on the label. The modification must have significant material change in the food product.
Numerous countries have adopted GM-derived varieties of crops. These include developed and developing nations. Even as there is understandable uncertainty in selected countries, the biotechnology agricultural age is occurring. The yield and cost differences that have been documented are the reason. When compared with minimal health risks, the economic, nutritional, and societal advantages of GM crops currently outweigh the need for stringent regulatory measures.